In the previous video, we've discussed the various handling as well as a sharing of N=1 scientific experiences amidst handling as well as consuming various expired foods, nearing over 5 long years worth of self-enquiring. In this video, we will continue discussing that amidst the various realm of specifically surrounding carbohydrates, legumes, and or bean products, next to also vegetables and various fruit-based products. And also, we'll be discussing the safety and concerns surrounding PUFA and vegetable oils. And once again, please consider watching this video multiple times so that you are well informed of the various citations and the research as attached throughout this extended feature presentation. And another short disclaimer is that none of this is meant to be taken as a gospel or as foolproof virtue for all to follow. This is simply a pragmatic guideline that may or may not be relevant to individual circumstances, individual gut cycle, individual gut setting, physiology, and or immunological status. So hence, your mileage, your experiences may yet vary as accordingly to your individual circumstances of needs and concerns. Okay, first of all, starting with bread, that is, plain flours and or wholemeal plain flours. Generally speaking, for as long as they are kept within cool and or dry ambient conditions, this author has had from experience has actually relied upon eating and consuming wholemeal plain flour for as long as 2 long years. That is correct. 2 long years of expiry date. Interestingly enough, did not actually cause any adverse gastric symptoms. Now, once again, would the same experiences were to occur with another individual? Well, once again, maybe it is, maybe not. It is always wise to always consider the contingencies, maintaining adequate micronutrient sufficiencies to maintain the gut lining health, as well as probiotics and prebiotic-rich foods. However, to be safe, once again, please exercise your due diligence at assessing whether or not there is any discoloration, and to make sure that it always remains dry to the touch. Exercise your due diligence at trying a smaller serving size first and foremost, and assess any gastric and or any indigestion symptoms were to arise. One type of food at a time. Should there is no symptoms, try increasing the serving size and reassess the symptoms once again. These leavening agents, whether it is baking soda as well as also with a little bit of cream of tartar, the jury, however, still remains debatable whether or not these leavening agents do affect the longevity of the and or shelf life of the product. It remains debatable, therefore. So hence, unfortunately, at this stage, we can only go by subjective anecdotal experiences, in which so far it appears to be safe. And this follows on to our next and mostly consumed staple in many households, raisin toasts and or simply white bread loaf and or multigrain loaves. For as long as they remain under freezer conditions, for as long as 4 months, and if it is consumed within 2 days as stated under the label, then it is considered safe. It can be rethawed and refrozen at any stage afterwards. It is also a good idea as a general rule of thumb once again to actually consider checking the surface appearances of the bread. If there is any signs of discoloration and or mold, simply discard them and only consume the areas that are still relatively safe and free of molds and or discolorations. However, when it comes to precautions and potential hazards, please keep in mind that many of these bread loaves do contain some amounts of polyunsaturated fatty acids, in which more often than not they may use canola oil and or vegetable oil, in which such vegetable oil, in which much to our concern, is not properly nor exactly labeled as to which type of fats that they actually use, whether it is soybean oil, cottonseed oil, or the same canola oil stated, or any other unstable vegetable-based omega polyunsaturated N6 fatty acids oils. The only pragmatic suggestion that this author would actually consider it as a pragmatic damage control advice would be to, once again, consider researching and periodizing vitamin E supplementary intakes. It need not be in huge, humongous dosages such as 1000 IU and upwards, as unfortunately studies which looks at all-cause mortality actually finds that dosages of chronically high dosages between that as stated as 1000 international units or higher seems to actually confer negative impacts on mortality rates. So hence that's another thing to keep in mind. However, once again, this topic is going to be reserved for another video altogether, because vitamin E is such a complex group of vitamins. Please consider reading and downloading the free-to-view manuscript as freely downloadable at nutritional-humility.me. The same generally also applies to raisin toasts. However, raisin toasts may have an added series of precautions to actually consider. Obviously, they contain some levels of fermented and or dried fruit products. In this case, some amounts of fructose, such as raisins and or currants. Now, the jury is still out whether or not they actually pose health hazard if they're actually consumed beyond their expiry date when it comes to their dried fruits content. However, keeping in mind that, once again, due to our concerns with, as explained in the prior video, as dietary glycation end products, fructose has been implicated in numerous laboratory studies, mechanistic studies, theoretical, empirical, and methodological studies to have demonstrated very strong and concerning glycating agent formations potential, in which thus, therefore, exposing this already heated and or dried raisins and or currants may not be a good idea overall, because of the fact that fructose seems to actually emanate glycating end products capability up to 10 times faster and 10 times more intense than glucose alone. It may be wise to not overly toast this raisin toast and or breads containing such fruit products. If it's just consumed under warm condition, then it's probably fine. But when it comes to using it under prolonged baking and or high temperature toasting conditions to the point of charcoal, to the point of being charred, then it may be wise to limit consumptions altogether. It is always better at the end of the day to actually consider making your own bread, should readers are actually quite gluten tolerant, depending on their gluten tolerance, obviously. DIY breads such as flatbreads are available as a recipe, in which all it takes is just salt, a bit of water, and the flour itself. Now, instructions on how to do those is available in a separate video, as provided in the description below. Nevertheless, these loaf of breads and or raisin toasts and or fruit-based inclusion in such products are generally considered to be only as novelty. And should readers actually find this at a good short-dated price, they can still safely store 1 or 2 loaves in the freezer for any incoming needed carbohydrate refeed days, and or just simply to have alternative means of carbohydrates should none other safer carbohydrates, pragmatically speaking, that would be as either rice and or gluten-free sources such as potatoes, are not within reach. Now, potatoes. Unfortunately, this would be a no. Since potatoes naturally hold large amounts of water, likewise, it is perhaps safe to conclude that potatoes are not to be best consumed, especially if they're close at or soon to reach their existing best before expiry dates. And this also includes ready-to-eat prepackaged salads, in which, again, this may or may not actually be congruent in all interpretations. However, as a pragmatic, safe advice would be to steer away from prepackaged salads, quinoa salads, and the like. It would be much better for us to just simply cook the potatoes as they are. Shown here is approximately 300 grams of sliced potatoes that has been mashed, but previously microwaved with a little bit of water for anywhere between 6 to 7 minutes on high. Once it's done microwaving, we can just manually mash them together with a masher and a fork. Once that's done, we can pinch in a little bit of pink Himalayan salt before transferring into any Tupperware, and then it's ready to be stored in the freezer. Long story short, if readers and or individuals are still prescribed or subscribed within strict clinical dietary subscriptions, as such that whether they're following a specific carbohydrate diet and or FODMAP restriction diet, would be wise to just avoid all spoiled fruits and vegetables as much as possible. Berries, and in this case specifically strawberries, are perhaps notorious for as quick as within 1 to 2 days, and if one is lucky, up to within 3 days. Hence, when it comes to strawberries and or any other species of berries, it will be wise to actually freeze them as quick as possible upon purchasing. Apples are also a great area when it comes to their safety consumption profiling, especially beyond symptoms of expiry, e.g., whether it is discoloration in and or around the cores. Again, always take a cross-section of the apple first beforehand, and or general appearance of molds or bacterial fungi proliferation symptoms and or signs. Now, speaking from experience, this author has had various DIY attempts at making DIY apple jams and or sauces with, however, very little success. And also with some unfortunate GI distress and overall digestive episodes of problems. There appears to be studies to suggest that mycotoxins that is produced by bacterial proliferations over time are actually persistent even under heated and or cooking conditions. So hence, that's one interesting thing to keep in mind, in which Cooking fruits, especially those fruits which are already semi-spoiled or on their way out, is perhaps still not as safe as many people would think. In that many people would think that cooking would actually destroy this bacteria, but apparently not in this case, as according to what a few studies have so far suggested. And as per what this author has actually experienced, unfortunately, we can safely assume it's generally not safe to actually rely on cooking already spoiled fruits, and in this case, apples. Whilst we are talking about fruits, it is also a good idea for us to also cover fruit jams, in which unfortunately, much to this author's experience, he would say no. It would not be wise to consume fruit jams and or concentrate or any fruit juice concentrates nearing at or beyond their expiry date. This author can notably recall in that there is either a sensation of unsettling symptoms, be it heartburn-like symptoms, hours, if not days later, should prolonged frequent consumption were to occur again and again, and or very loose bowel movements to the point of diarrhea-like symptoms. So, what is the only exception then when it comes to safe fruit consumption beyond their expiry date? Well, unfortunately, that would only leave us to ripe and or overripe bananas. This, of course, remains subjective. However, overripe bananas are actually interestingly shown to have an increased concentrations in key micronutrients, especially that, as interesting enough, several antioxidant compounds as well as increased vitamin C the more it ripens. So, however, on the downside, it may also turn to ethanol and or alcohol-like aftertaste within them over time. It may or may not predispose some individuals towards various gastro-like symptoms. Now, speaking from this author's experience, overripe bananas, they seem to aggravate GI symptoms, but not to the point of diarrhea-like symptoms. However, are they safe to consume overall, persistently and repeatedly in the long run? This author would say no. But again, one or two occasional overripe bananas, especially during carbohydrate refeed meals, may not actually hurt. However, if it's a lot, then it may rise to concern. Next section, vegetables. Generally speaking, vegetables which naturally contain a lot of water, for instance, cucumbers, zucchinis, as well as potatoes, as we described earlier, and or some leafy greens such as Swiss chards and or collard greens, may not be entirely safe to consume should they exhibit symptoms of on the way out. So such symptoms are the following, although not restricted to the fact that they may become discolored or that they may darken over time, or most importantly, that they may actually be leaking their water content over time. Now, this will lead to several concerns, as such that not only it may predisposes one to contract bacterial infection, it may also lead to a gradual loss of micronutrient intensity, as such that since much of these vegetables do hold some key water-based soluble minerals, the more water it loses, the more micronutrient minerals does, therefore that it may also be lost alongside its spoilage process. Generally speaking, frozen vegetables such as cauliflower, and also any frozen mixes, carrots, peas, broccolis are generally safe to consume for as long as they are cooked thoroughly and for as long as there is no initial signs of spoilage in the first place prior to cooking. Leafy greens, okay. Again, for as long as they remain dry and not wet, collard greens, kale, and Swiss chards are relatively safe to consume. However, again, when it comes to kale, especially those that carries less water, they may also subject to discoloration. Unfortunately, it might not be safe to consume this regularly in the long run, because of the fact that, once again, any discoloration may likely have shown symptoms of oxidation, and thus also shows a compromise in micronutrient profiling. So hence, simply discard the discoloration away and simply consume the parts that are still at least of green color. And once again, if the vegetables have already exhibited water leakage from them, even though if they are prepared under refrigeration, it is generally thus not safe for consumption. Onions and or garlic. Usually, once again, this just like apples, these groups of vegetables are also prone to molds and or bacterial spoilage. So hence, for as long as we actually cut away the areas that have either discolor or spots of gray discoloration, then it is likely safe to consume. However, if they have lost their rigidity, or that they begin to appear mushy and less solid, then unfortunately it is on the way out, and therefore it would not be safe to continue consumption at that state. Unfortunately, to be safe and sound, this author would likely say no. It would not be safe to consume table spreads, PUFAs, especially that of lipid peroxidative prone vegetable oils such as omega-6 fatty acids, especially in some cases even light olive oils, including that as those refined olive oil variants. Specifically that as table spread in this case, for as long as they are well kept in the freezer, once again, and that they are not used for high temperature cooking, and for as long as they are just consumed in their melted state, should actually not produce harmful effects per se. Are they safe to be used in high temperature cooking, however? No. That remains, unfortunately, a long series of debate in which, unfortunately, this video cannot actually cater such a lengthy debate. So, other than the fact that this author can only mildly speculate out of pragmatism and out of safety, should readers and individuals persist on consuming and relying on these unstable fatty acids, which are prone to oxidations over time, they would be wise to consider supplementing with vitamin E. And once again, to also never forget other fat-soluble vitamins, whether it is from dietary sources and or regular supplementation. Dietary sources being coming that from, as unfortunately not a lot of people are consuming this enough, livers, hearts, and or supplementation such as D, E, and K. Another experience in which this author would like to share is that he had notable sensitivities towards that as grapeseed oils, in which these are composed of quite high on the omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids makeup, in that even after brief consumption, heartburn-like symptoms, unsettling-like symptoms, especially in the upper GI section or even the lower chest region, seems to persist whenever these grapeseed oils are consumed, even if they are not used for cooking at all. So hence, does such adverse events apply to all other individuals? Maybe they do, maybe they are not. So hence, it is always wise, therefore, to keep a nutritional journaling at all times. Condiments, in this case as liquid-based condiments such as sauces, mayonnaises, and the like, can be quite of a gray area to consider, considering that there is always multiple confounding factors that we have to, first of all, determine. Now, so we're going to go through this one by one. So first of which is, are they sweet or salty-based condiments? Unfortunately, this author has not yet experienced many consumptions when it comes to nearing at or beyond expiry date various condiments. However, he would speculate sweet-based condiments, then it would be a no. It would not be safe to consume sweet-based condiments nearing at or beyond their expiry date unless if the sweetener that is being currently used are ones that are based from natural based sweetener such as monk fruit and or in some barbecue sauces, sugar-free barbecue sauces, stevia glycosides. And this leads us to the only safe subjectively gray area of condiments, and that is the savory type. Minced garlic and or just minced ginger, for as long as they have added basic preservatives such as vinegar and or salt, may be subjectively safe to consume for as long as, again, we are exercising our due diligence at ensuring that we can compensate any damages by ensuring that we are using other means to compensate: thyme, garlic, oregano, parsley, turmeric once again, and or curcumin, to name a few that we can use to help offset any unwanted bacterial proliferation during the cooking process and as well as during the reheating process amidst our everyday use of these condiments. Yes, at least judging from this author's experience, for as long as the tomato paste remains under normal refrigerated conditions, there doesn't seem to be any palatability differences. However, we have to make sure that from time to time, we have to take a look at the overall glass packaging to ensure that there is no unwanted bacteria, particularly on areas where the top of the jar and or the lid is. Just make sure that we actually always take a little sample of any suspecting ingredient in any of our cooked dishes. And if it appears to be safe, as such that the palatability remains to be expected, and that too there doesn't seem to be any follow-up adverse gut discomforts and or stomach malaise, it would be safe to say that yes, such a suspecting food and or ingredient still remains good for consumption. Another case example, which is quite timely within the making and the production of this video presentation series, is that of alternatively sweetened and or no sugar variety of condiments and or sauces. This particular brand of no added sugar sauces actually features, transparently enough, natria-based sweetener, in which that itself is consisting of erythritol and the stevia glycosides. For as long as they are kept under refrigeration and that they are only used under non-high temperature cooking conditions and only to be served as a warm temperature condiment on top of any featured meal dishes, whether ketogenic or non-ketogenic, appears to be safely tolerated. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to canned beans, legumes, and or pulses, nearing at or beyond their expiry date is perhaps not safe to consume. Once again, generally speaking, beans, legumes, and pulses, even though yes, they are a very economical source of proteins, however, are they qualitative per se? Unfortunately, not so convincing. This author can actually specifically recall in that various not only unsettling symptoms such as the fact that consistently diarrhea-like symptoms and as well as very unsettling symptoms in the upper GI tract hours upon each and every feeding session, which involves beans, to the point of being painful as such that he is unable to actually continue consuming his a scheduled set of meals as required to fulfill the caloric requirements throughout the day. So hence, that just goes as proof of burden and proof of authenticity, as such that unfortunately, beans and legumes are definitely not for every human physiologies. any unsettling symptoms or effects from consuming these canned beans or legumes in general is that they may not actually appear immediately per se. However, it may yet be accumulatively so in the long run. Once again, this video is not a space to debate upon the nutritive or the anti-nutritive qualities of pulses. For more information, please visit and read the entire manuscript as freely available at the website. So that wraps up and concludes the second of our 3 video presentation series. On the next and third last video of this series, we will discuss the safety of consuming dry food groups of consumables. So that will be protein powders, textured vegetable proteins, coffees, herbs, and spices. Please leave your comments and thoughts below should you find this video immensely useful, and please consider sharing this video to any individuals whom you may find likewise of relative concerns amidst these very difficult, uncertain times. Hence, all this is about reconciling what you can or cannot do, as well as also partitioning what enough means in various stratified structural violence, involuntarily structural violence altogether. Exercise your due diligence, exercise your self-enquiring, and most of all, keep living it forward. Thank you for watching.